Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. This is a new type of research cafe for us. Normally in November and February, we have research cafes where we would have maybe 4 faculty members present with 2 of their grad students and talk about the research going on in their labs. This year, there's been a recent report that students in their lives now will probably have anywhere from 3 to 7 jobs as their career. And that kind of got us to thinking that already there are probably people who have gone through a career path that involved some change, some shifts. Sometimes change in one's path happens because you actively made a change and sought it out. In other cases, it was thrust upon you through the process of downsizing, or a lot of jobs have been lost because of the way of doing things has changed and they're no longer needed through automation and things of that nature. So it led us to believe that maybe the issue of careers and career paths and interesting career paths that one might take would be of value to have people tell their stories to grad students, to acknowledge it happens and there's another side you can come out of with it, but also that there are some stresses and strains associated with that. There's decisions making to be done. You have to evaluate pros and cons and things of that nature. And so we have 4 people who have agreed to come and talk about their career paths. They're going to spend 10-12 minutes or thereabouts each presenting their career path. And then Cameron Muir is going to tell us through a PowerPoint presentation about stress and the stress axis and the ravages of stress, and a little bit about coping. And he may have a real career path incident that he might throw in there too. So the first presenter, who will also be the moderator up until the end, is Dr. Philip Wright. Philip's title, he gave me his badge so I would get it right. Associate Vice President, Information Technology and Chief Information Officer. So you can pretty well bet that's a lot of hardware and software, and I will leave it at that point. Philip came to Brock about 4.5 years ago from University of Toronto Scarborough, and he's been busy since then organizing and more organizing of our ITS systems, both the hardware parts and the software parts. So Philip will take us through he'll present his own, he'll take us through the end, and then I'll come back and he'll join, and we'll have a panel that they'll answer any questions you have at the end. So have a good night. Philip.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. Thanks very much, Dean Pliley, for that introduction. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. It seems like night because it's dark, but you know, it's only afternoon, let's face it. Welcome, everybody. I was here 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, at a similar event, and I thought, what an amazingly wonderful thing to put on. When I was a graduate student, there wasn't such a thing, and I thought this was a wonderful sort of support that graduate studies puts on here, and for me, part of the charge that I get out of this is getting to meet some new people and some people that I work with and finding out things about them I had no idea about. So I hope that's what's of interest to you this afternoon. And before I go very far, I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to introduce the people who have very kindly given up time from their afternoon to be with us. I know they feel the same way I do, that talking with people in your position is an important thing to do. So I want to thank all the panelists for joining us today on your behalf, and I wanted to introduce them. So the first person on your right there is Ashley Short. She's the Executive Director of Learning Disabilities Association of Niagara Region. Ashley started her post-secondary career with the intention of becoming a primary school teacher. She taught as an occasional teacher for 2 years at the DSBN. In the 7 years that Ashley was at Brock, leading up to 2010, she finished 3 degrees, a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Education, and a Master's degree. Instead of teaching, though, Ashley currently runs a successful not-for-profit organization in the Niagara region. So I think she's going to have some interesting things to tell you. So thank you very much for joining us, Ashley. Next to Ashley is Alan Rigby. Alan is a PhD candidate in applied health sciences. We were just talking about what Alan is working on in his PhD, and I think everybody's got an interesting story. Alan's got a particularly interesting story. Alan is a Canadian certified prosthetist and orthotist. I'm sure he will tell you all about that if you don't already know what those are. He's the owner and chief clinical consultant for Niagara Prosthetics and Orthotics, as well as Niagara Wheelchairs and Seating. In a constant attempt to improve his clinical capacity and better understand the science of patient outcome, he has embarked on his PhD. By focusing on outcome measure, his research is expected to improve patient care and scientific understanding in the field. So thank you very much for joining us, Alan. Next to Alan is somebody I've known for several years here, and I'm astounded to find out wonderful things about him. Professor Don Seer is our interim dean, Faculty of Business. Don's a wonderful guy. He commenced his career as a uranium exploration geologist. I had no idea. With a BSc in geology from Concordia University, and worked in northern Quebec, northern Ontario, and northern Saskatchewan. After completing his MBA at the University of Saskatchewan, he then worked as a financial analyst in the oil industry with Shell Canada in Calgary, where he also started studying part-time towards a master's degree in resource economics, because, you know, you just can't have too many degrees, it turns out. Ultimately, he completed a master's in economics and PhD in finance at the University of Alberta. He has held several academic positions as a finance professor at the University of Saskatchewan, the University of Northern British Columbia, and finally at Brock University. Thank you very much for joining us. Next to Don is Dr. Cameron Muir from Brock's Psychology Department. As Dean Pliley said in his remarks, Dr. Muir's research focuses on, among other things, stress physiology, and he'll be doing a presentation for us today on stress, and in particular stress brought about by change and mechanisms and strategies for coping with stress. So thank you very much for joining us today. So, you know, I said I took part in this event 2 years ago, and here I am again, and both times I've had to scratch my head thinking, you know, why me and what do I have to offer? And both times I've come to the conclusion that it's really not about me, it's about you. So the pressure is off as far as I'm concerned. Everybody in this room has an interesting story. We all have the life paths that, you know, we've taken up until now. We've all had a lot of decisions that we've had to make. Many of them are stressful, and you know as well as anybody on the at the front of the room that you know, you deal with stress every day. People talk about creative stress and bad stress, and I guess I'm one of those people. I think stress is an important factor in all our lives. And when I was thinking about how to talk about my stresses, I kind of think, well, what do I have in common with you? And what I know about you is that you're all graduate students, and I guess that's where a story can start. For me, and for you, the story starts a lot sooner. You've had to make decisions to get here. You've had to work very hard to get where you are, and you have a lot of hard work in front of you to do anything that really matters in life. You know, so we talk about people who have changed careers. I started off, I was a high school dropout. In fact, I hated high school, and I was only too glad to go and work for the Bank of Nova Scotia for a year. That was my first job, and I thought, hey, I'm going to be a banker, until I received a notification from HR one day that told me I was going to, this was in 1978, that I was going to retire in 2024, and I thought, there's no way I can do this for that many years. I have to leave. So I did, and I went to become an art student. And I studied art, and I thought, you know, this is a career path that I could take. And I made friends with fellow artists and got to know an amazing artist who now lives in Florence and, you know, does portraiture that sells for $400,000 and $500,000 a whack. And I thought this would be a great guy to study with, and lo and behold, just as a friend of mine and I were about to go and work with him, the bottom fell out of the economy, and this was in early 80s, and that fell apart. So I went to university. And I got to university, and I started doing well in philosophy, and I thought, well, this is a career path that I could take. So, well, it turns out that university has lasting value because, you know, 11 years later, I graduated with 3 degrees after being at the University of Toronto, and then I did my master's at Western and went back to U of T for a PhD. And, you know, lo and behold, you graduate at the end of that time, and you think, right, it's time to get paid for all of this effort. Well, it's not like that. Because, well, I was ready to graduate in 1991 after having had 2 children. I got married in my last year of undergraduate, and we had kids while my wife was also a PhD student at U of T. Talk about stressful, that was crazy stress. At 1991, I was ready to graduate, and my thesis supervisor, who I'd known for years, said, you know, don't graduate now. The economy's in tatters. It'll be better next year. So I took an assistant professorship at U of T and worked my brains out while I was putting the finishing touches on my thesis. And 1992 came around, and guess what? The economy was even worse. And his advice to me was, just hang on for another year. And I said, well, you know, it's not a good thing to be mounting up years on your PhD, and he agreed, so I graduated. And at that point, you know, you're out on the job market, up against literally thousands of people who look like you all over North America in a terrible economy. And in Canada, in philosophy, in the 1990s, there were a lot of changes being made because, of course, universities hire in these massive waves, and it was time to redress some of the imbalances, the gender imbalances across Canada that had resulted from the hirings in the 60s and early 70s. So not only was the economy in tatters, but there were gender imbalances that needed to be righted. And, you know, I taught feminist courses and ethics and things like that. So I had to agree from my own point of view as a philosopher. I thought this was a good thing to do. But here I am caught, you know, at the confluence of a couple of really dire changes in the market as far as I was concerned. I was very fortunate. I landed an 8-month contract at the University of Alberta, which, if you don't know it, Don knows, is a spectacular university in Edmonton. So we packed up our kids, and my wife packed up her PhD thesis, and off we went to Alberta for an 8-month contract for which I got paid $25,000. You can't live on $25,000 with 2 kids and a wife who's not making money. So an 8-month contract eventually turned into 3 8-month contracts. The most I made at Alberta was $33,000, and I was very proud to have been the top-ranked lecturer in the philosophy department in my time there. That was pretty cool. But I only made $33,000 while I was there. And of course, an 8-month contract runs out pretty quickly, and you have to start thinking very early on in that contract about what your next job is going to be. And of course, you know, you're applying all over North America for jobs that might come, and at the same time, trying to do some research to get onto the tenure stream. And, oh, by the way, in those days, and it may still be the case in some places, when you're an early graduate, some universities, some departments like to load you up with extra special work. So where everybody else was teaching 5 courses, I got to teach 6 full courses without TA support. So, yeah, that was a pretty stressful time. After doing that for 3 years, we came back to Ontario. My wife took a job. She decided that there was no way that there were going to be 2 academics who had decent jobs, so she abandoned her aspirations to become a professor and took a job in the financial industry of all things, and has worked at King and Bay in the First Canadian Place ever since 1995. So she's got her career nicely aligned. I came back and worked at Trent University for 3 more years on contracts, and finally decided after making $24,000 a year that this was no life. So I went to the private sector to do something that had been an interest of mine since about 1984, when I first bought my first computer. In fact, a lot of the people that I knew in the late 80s and early 90s, as I was struggling to finish my PhD, had already made that shift and went to Nortel and got out of academia and went to into computing, high tech. So I'd followed their career paths and realized that this was an option for me. So I ended up going and working for a consulting firm in Toronto, and lo and behold, that in the 3 years that I spent there, that company was bought out twice, and I ended up working for people in New York and Ann Arbor without changing my chair. It was astounding. I then had an opportunity to come back to academia, and I worked at Scarborough campus as first the manager and then the director of IT at the Scarborough campus U of T for 6 years, and I've been here for 4.5 years. So, all that to say, at some level, there's a Disney story, I guess, that winds its way through all that stuff. I really don't think I'm particularly special. I think I know many people who have had many career changes, certainly many jobs. I would say a couple of things. The intestinal fortitude, the intelligence, the drive that got all of you to where you are all of the things that you will need to survive and succeed, and you will all succeed in whatever happens to you down the road. So I remember being in your situation and, not knowing what's next and thinking, how am I going to survive this? And I'll tell you, because I think you probably feel this as well, there's been more than one occasion in my life when I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I would actually physically break from the stress that I was under. I expect some of you have felt that as well. I can tell you that you do get through it. Early on when I was doing my PhD, I got through it in a very bad way with alcohol, and that was just to calm me down so that I could write, because writing a 300-page thesis is pretty difficult stuff. That's not a good thing. I would not recommend that. Long walks are way better. But you're going to deal with stress in whatever way comes to you. You really do need a network of people. You need trusted people that you can talk to, and some of those people are in this room. Dean Plyley, Gail Elliott. The people in graduate studies here are incredible people, and they're out for your best interests. You should not hesitate to talk to them. And there's student services here that you should not hesitate to use rather than go to alcohol or other medications. The network is the second thing. Aside from everything that got you here, the network is the most important thing. And I think in your position, you need to develop a couple of different kinds of networks. You need an academic network, the people around you, the professors that you know, the people that you're going to know. But then you also need to develop sort of a backup plan network that you may already have in place. But if you don't, because academia sometimes attracts people who are introverts, if you don't have a network, I highly recommend you get one. It doesn't have to be large. 2, 3, 4 people who can help you bridge gaps. That's critical, because when you get to the point where you can't where you think you can't handle it, you turn to those people and they're your lifeline. But I think the one thing that I've learned, you know, I'm what is it, 53 now, the one thing I've learned through all of that is really that smart people aren't smart just in the classroom or in writing or in teaching or in their research. Smart people are smart. You've chosen to deploy your intelligence and your efforts in a certain way, right? And one of the problems with academia is that you get rewarded for that behavior in a way that you don't get rewarded in business. You get grades. And it's very easy to become addicted to grades and scholarships, and it's very easy to identify with that persona that you create while you're a student. And if you're a graduate student, you've already spent many years creating that persona for yourself. And I think that's probably the biggest liability for graduate students, is that you spend years being a graduate student and not thinking of yourself, not having the opportunity to think of yourself as just a smart person who's got lots of drive and intestinal fortitude. And I think if you're worried about the future, I would say this. It might seem bland, cold comfort, but I would have confidence, not knowing any of you, that you're going to survive and succeed wherever you deploy your intelligence. And if it looks as though, you know, you're not going to get the job that you think you're going to get, your life isn't going to fall apart. There's certainly going to be some tough choices, and there are going to be some hiatuses, but that just makes you like the rest of humanity these days. The thing to bear in mind is that you aren't a graduate student. That's not you. You're an intelligent person that works really hard at graduate studies. Right? And I think that if I had one message, that's the one I would leave you with today. I'm sure our other panelists will have lots of other interesting things to tell you, but that's my nugget for what it's worth. So I'll look forward to hearing your stories and hearing your discussion.